Recently, the UFC and WWE merged under one parent company, TKO. Today, TKO is the leader and premier entertainment organization in combat sports. For any of you that know me personally, you know that I am a humongous UFC fan and also a WWE fan as well. So when the companies became public and spun off of Endeavor, I know I had to directly invest at some point. The only thing really holding me back was the lack of financials that they had. But just a few weeks ago, I started my position in TKO and plan on expanding it, and today I'll be showing you guys why. I'm not only going to fanboy in this video, but also share the bear and bull theses on both companies and the risks associated. Before we get into the video, I typically tell you to buy the merch, which is of course the same for this one. We have beanies out now, they're very good looking, go check them out. But also, let me know who your favorite UFC or WWE fighter is. For me, UFC, of course it's Conor McGregor, and for WWE, I'm going OG with Kane. With all that out of the way, roll the intro.
Let's get this show started! The reigning, defending, 155-pound champion of the UFC, the notorious Conor McGregor!
I'm taller than you, I'm better looking than you, I'm stronger than you.
Who the fuck is that guy?
Hello, I like money.
In my opinion, and widely regarded by a lot of fans of mixed martial arts and quote-unquote pro wrestling, that the UFC and WWE are the two premier and two largest companies in their respected organizations and sports, you could even call them. Unfortunately, since TKO is a newly filed company, the financial data is highly skewed on it, and we're going to have to wait a few years to see how it is. One thing that is confirmed, though, is that they are profitable right now and making free cash flow, the most important metric in any business. The UFC's main competitor is PFL and other boxing organizations, and if I'm being completely honest, competition is the least of my concerns when it comes to the UFC. For multiple years now, the UFC has been considered the premier organization for mixed martial arts. Now, Bellator and the PFL have actually recently merged, so it's going to be a little interesting, but I still don't expect them to compete with them whatsoever. If you watch a Bellator PFL event, sure, the fighters may be good. They have nowhere near as much star power as the UFC. There are barely any people that go to the events, compared to the UFC at least, and we can see by revenue here, the UFC is by far the number one company, and I still think that PFL and Bellator's merge will not be a threat to them whatsoever. The UFC will remain the premier organization for mixed martial arts for decades to come. Well, the WWE's main competition, I would say, is AEW, and which is ironically, they've been stealing superstars for them, including Cody Rhodes and just recently CM Punk. CM Punk's recent return to the WWE was absolutely insane. Not only did it go viral on the internet, but it also had a crazy pop from the crowd there. Watch it. Now, the WWE used to be a public company itself, and I was actually interested in that as well. I had never been to a WWE event before until about last year, and I can honestly say, seeing some of the fans there and how, let's just say, addicted they were to the product that the WWE is offering, I was instantly knew that this was an amazing business. I think the fans of the WWE and the support that they give the company is one of the most intangible assets that you could ever look for in a business. It's made me so much bullish on this company. People love going to these events, people are addicted going to these events, and people go to these events to escape reality of the world sometimes. And it's the same with any entertainment, and I think WWE brings it up a notch. The WWE has also significantly grown their revenue. In 2022, they had over $1.2 billion in revenue per year. Something else that really impressed me with the WWE recently was how Triple H has come in and really taken over the company from Vince McMahon. Something that I love that Triple H has done with the WWE has brought influencers and superstars from non-wrestling genres into the WWE. Last year, he brought in Logan Paul and signed him to the WWE, even though Logan Paul is a scumbag. They also brought rappers and influencers like Lil Uzi Vert on last year, and they're continuing to do it. They had like Bad Bunny on as well, and they're really expanding and branching into so many different fan bases and niches. This is a huge equation in my bull case in WWE. You could also say that the WWE has reoccurring revenue source in the case that they have WrestleMania and Royal Rumble weekend every year. This is an absolutely insane weekend that takes over social media and really puts WWE back in the spotlight of the national attention. The WWE often also has surprise comebacks. Now, recently The Rock had one, but they never know when it's going to happen, and it really leaves the fan on the edge of their seat. This is something huge for them as well. The UFC also does an amazing job on social media marketing as well. On Instagram, they have 39 million followers, and Bellator and the PFL combined only have 4.5 million. If that doesn't speak to the scales of the UFC, I don't know what will. Pro wrestling and mixed martial arts also have a very young and diverse fan base as well. About 71 to 75% of the UFC and WWE's main revenue is from media, that's mainly pay-per-view sales. The UFC has 13% of the revenue made up from sponsorships. This is companies like Monster, Prime. They'll pay to basically have their logo on the octagon or presented during the broadcast. Great revenue stream and only has pricing power as well. 11% of the UFC's revenue comes from live events and 10% with the same WWE. I believe this only has more room to grow, as in COVID, they were limited in the amount of live events they could do, and they were doing a lot of events at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas, where they couldn't hold as many fans, sell as much drinks, etc. Now, Dana White, the UFC CEO, has essentially said that they plan on traveling more and going to different parts of the world. The UFC's main events that they do about 10 to 12 per year are basically the pay-per-views. Now, the most upcoming one is UFC 297 in Toronto, and these are really big events. These are events that go viral on social media, and they have a lot of press coverage around them and a lot of promotion. The beauty of the UFC is really the star power that it has compared to other minor organizations. Now, a few years ago, I thought the UFC roster was less talented, but I was absolutely proven wrong. In the last few years, there are so many new superstars that are emerging that are replacing the old age of superstars that are retiring, like Conor McGregor. A few examples of this are Israel Adesanya, Alex Pereira, Sean O'Malley, Islam Makhachev, and there are so many more up-and-coming fighters with huge personalities now. A few years ago, the problem with the UFC is that fighters really didn't know how to market and sell fights. Today, that is no issue whatsoever. There are so many names with big mouths and big fighting that make you want to tune in as a fan to rather watch them get knocked out or root them on and win. It's really a double-edged sword, and it's amazing for the business of the UFC, and this has only been increasing the last few years. As I mentioned, Conor McGregor has been inactive for the UFC over the last basically 3 years, but he is scheduled to make a comeback fight sometime in 2024. I think this would absolutely be huge for the company and would only be added revenue. And as I mentioned, the UFC has been doing great without Conor McGregor the last few years. I can only imagine how powerful and how much more added revenue and benefit there would be for all fighters and shareholders if he returned. Over the last 10 years, the UFC has grown crazy revenue-wise as well, consistently too. Now, obviously free cash flow is the most important thing here, but TKO Holdings doesn't yet have a lot of free cash flow data, so we're going to have to wait for that. And that gets me into the stock's financials. Unfortunately, since they're just recently filed, there's not a lot of financial data on them. As you guys know, we love returning shareholders on this channel. We love dividends and share buybacks. Now, TKO does pay a dividend, but there are various fake reports on what they actually pay. One report says that they pay a $4.89 dividend, but according to Schwab and my brokerage, they pay an 0.8% yield on that dividend right now. I'm going to go with the 0.8% yield. I think it's a lot more realistic. At the end of the day, though, this does indicate that they are free cash flow positive, and according to dividenddata.com, they are currently free cash flow positive. I also think there's a humongous amount of growth for the UFC and WWE coming in the next decade and beyond. I think the UFC honestly hasn't even scratched the surface of where they could be, emerging into new markets, getting new fighters and star power on the roster. Actually, just recently, the UFC signed Bellator superstar Michael Venom Page. He's one of the biggest fighters in Bellator, and he chose to go to the UFC. This shows how much of a brand that UFC has and the type of eyes that it attracts. It's a better move for Page, and the UFC also gets benefit as well. It's a win-win. Now, something a lot of people like to complain about with the UFC is the low fighter pay. A few years ago, this was a huge topic of debate and really had the UFC under some scrutiny. Now, unfortunately, the UFC is actually the top company when it comes to fighter pay, and the UFC has so many fighters on the roster. Right now, they have over 600 fighters on the roster, and that's continuing to grow. Now, Dana White, the UFC CEO, has said, if you don't like the fighter pay, leave or start a different organization. And there's been crickets since then. Jake Paul a few years ago was really trying to get under Dana White and the UFC's skin and really trying to cause an impact to their business. That really hasn't gone anywhere, and he's called for $50,000 minimum on fights. Now, Jake Paul doesn't understand how businesses actually run, and that's probably why his pay-per-view sales are declining. Another reason that I love TKO Holdings so much as a business is really the leadership as well. And that's a big part of why I'm buying the stock right now as a small position in my portfolio. Currently, the CEO is Ari Emanuel, who Dana White has referred to as an absolute savage, and the results have proved it when it comes to their revenue growth. Also, Vince McMahon and Dana White are on the board of directors, so that's definitely an added addition too. I'm personally a huge Dana White fan. I think he's an amazing businessman and CEO, and of course, I love Vince McMahon as well. At the end of the day, I love WWE and the UFC for long-term entertainment. I think that they have so much more growth ahead of them, and I'm a huge fan of the leadership. So, as for the lack of financials right now, and just not a lot of history on it, I have started a small position in it. Currently, I only own 2 shares, and I plan to continue expanding as that's a little more consistent. So, it's a bit of a gamble position in my portfolio, a bit of an outlier, but I still do think it will be an amazing long-term investment. It's definitely a standout from the rest of my companies who have a lot more predictable free cash flow and all that, but you could say this is my Crocs holding. Alright, I appreciate you all making it to the video. If you appreciate the quality that I put into it, it's probably my highest quality video I made so far, and the awesome intro that I spent way too long on. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Check out the merch if you haven't already, and of course, do the Socks Out Jugs. Have a good one.